So over the past couple of days, I've been playing a lot of a new game, a closed alpha, in fact, called PUBG Black Budget. And for fans of the channel, any kind of longtime viewers, a lot of you guys probably know that I go way back with PUBG. I mean, this was a game that, at least for a long time on my channel, was basically the main content that was here. The actual battlegrounds, right, PUBG as the game that it was, is literally one of my favorite games ever, and it's what got me into the Battle Royale genre. And I absolutely loved PUBG for a very long time. It has changed quite a lot over the years, and maybe I don't play it as much these days, but it will always have a special place in my heart. And also, you know, PUBG as a studio, I will always be interested in what they're working on. So when they released their new alpha for this brand new game called Black Budget, I was extremely interested. And after getting a decent amount of playtime on this, I want to give you guys my thoughts as to whether this game is right for you, if it's something that would be interesting and worth checking out. Obviously, again, throughout this whole video, keep in mind that this is an alpha build, and I will judge it as such because an alpha is a good enough way to get kind of a handle on what the gameplay loop is going to be about generally, but obviously a lot of the details and extra content is just not here yet. It has a long ways to go before it is fully done, but we can have an idea of what the game is all about. With that in mind, what exactly is PUBG Black Budget? Now, this really, as far as I can tell, doesn't have anything to do with PUBG, the Battle Royale, not only from a gameplay perspective, but mostly from a narrative point of view. This is essentially an extraction shooter in which you are a mercenary or an operative, and you exist in the year 2035, but when you jump into this wormhole or you approach this island with this time vortex surrounding it, you are consistently sent back to the year 2002, where this entire island is caught in this time loop. So it's a very interesting premise with, you know, space-time keeping this one geolocation in a certain time period when you are back in the present day or whatever. So this leads to some really interesting aesthetics and ideas, and it's very much like Black Ops classified stuff, which again, for me, is exactly the kind of thing that I'm looking for. This is really the kind of world that does it for me personally. So I find the premise, the aesthetic, and the entire idea super interesting. And I'm not just saying that either. This is the kind of world that personally really works for me and is something that I would get very heavily invested in. And even just exploring the world, I can already feel that from the beginning, because when you start out, you spawn away from the island. You can see it in the distance, but you can kind of walk around this little safe zone, and you have tons of options for building out your base, expanding these kinds of things. And obviously, as you go into the island and extract more gear and items and things like that, you can build out your base to exactly what you want and expand your operations. It's a really neat progression system here. Now, PUBG Black Budget assumes that you have at least some degree of familiarity with extraction shooters, and the entire idea, right, is dropping into a raid, getting in, extracting with good loot when you can find it, and getting out safely and alive, otherwise you lose everything. And the extraction shooter genre obviously has made some waves over the past couple of months, especially with stuff like Arc Raiders and even Marathon coming out in a handful of months from now. And this means that PUBG Black Budget needs to do something to differentiate itself from the popular competition, right? But Tarkov really being the king of this genre at the moment. And I would say, you know, there's a lot of extraction shooters that I have not played personally, but I would say of the ones that I have played, PUBG Black Budget clearly draws the most inspiration from Escape from Tarkov, and that is made crystal clear as soon as you start playing the game. And one of the things that I find maybe a little bit disappointing about Black Budget, and is a common complaint that I'm seeing a lot right now, is that PUBG Black Budget has literally nothing to do with PUBG at all. Not just from a narrative or story point of view, but even just down to the gameplay design choices. I mean, to me, the gunplay, I know what PUBG gunplay feels like. I have thousands of hours on that game, and it has a very specific feel. I would say that Black Budget's gameplay doesn't feel like PUBG in the slightest. It's definitely its own thing, but it's not PUBG gunplay. Now, if you haven't played much PUBG yourself, it's kind of hard to articulate how the guns feel in that game, but they're very specific, and also that all of the weapons have their own unique and difficult recoil patterns, but they can be learned. Each and every single individual weapon basically has its own learning curve and its own sort of recoil pattern that you can try to adjust to and sort of figure out how to manage, and you can get really good at a specific weapon. But the way that Black Budget's guns appear to work is that the recoil patterns seem almost entirely fairly random, meaning you can't really learn guns the way that you would learn a gun in PUBG. This makes gunfights a lot more unpredictable and obviously exciting in a way because you never really know what's going to happen every time you pull the trigger, but that can lead to frustrating situations, especially in a game that is primarily revolving around PvP. Now, I don't think I need to explain the general gameplay loop of extraction shooters to most of you. It's pretty straightforward. You jump into a map during a raid, you come in and you either try to complete missions that you take on as tasks and objectives from, certain mercenaries and NPCs out in the world, and then you go in to, do missions for them, or you go to the center of the map and try to take on the most difficult content after you've geared up a little bit and have some of the best loot to take on that difficult area. Black Budget is really no different in that sense. You have even the same extraction mechanics. You either have to find these underwater pods that you can get into, and then obviously those take you out of the island, or if you get caught without one of these pods, occasionally there will be a wormhole to spawn, which is available extraction for anybody, which you have to activate and then defend and keep all of your gear. This is a really neat idea, and just from the concept of it, I think really works for this game. Again, everything about the lore, the world, and just the premise is really something I enjoy, but I will say that the actual gameplay is something that I'm not really sold on yet, because as it currently stands, the gameplay is not something that I feel is meaningfully different to other extraction shooters out there, but specifically Tarkov. Now, I haven't played Tarkov in a couple of months. I used to play it quite a lot, probably like a year ago, but since I, haven't really played it that much, I will say that PUBG Black Budget really reminded me of my experience in Tarkov, with the world being obviously very different, gunfights feeling kind of similar, but also not really familiar in any way that is related to PUBG, which is disappointing because to me, PUBG has one of the best gameplay systems of all time, and I really like how the guns feel in that game. But, obviously Black Budget is more of a mix of PvP and some PvE settings. You can fight wild animals out here, and as you push more into the center areas, you will fight increasingly twisted creatures, which obviously has to do everything with the lore and the more difficult parts of this map, which is great. Now, I will say for the most part, the world's mechanics and structure are actually pretty good. There are some times where I do admit that the world feels kind of empty, especially if there isn't much PvP encounters going on here. There's a severe lack of PvE encounters in a lot of these areas too, leading just to a lot of empty wandering around, but the actual structure of how you get around the map, and specifically some of the more difficult areas, is really cool, because as this is a military base, there are military clearance key cards, and for the different levels you have, if you have a level 3 key, let's say, you can access level 3 areas, but you can also access everything under that, so 1 and 2 respectively. And I think this is a really neat idea because it's not just like a one and done use for a key card, which makes it, feel a lot more impactful. And it also just makes complete contextual sense with the world, which makes it feel much more immersive in that way. The entire looting process, I think, is also pretty smooth, but the actual UI in the menu, again, just looks pretty much identical to how Tarkov is. It's not something that I feel is like identifiably PUBG, something that is only unique to them. It just kind of feels like I'm playing more Tarkov in that way. Now, I'm somebody who tends to enjoy more PvE-oriented stuff in my extraction shooters. PvP stuff is fine, and I do enjoy it, but I also like ones that feel alive from the perspective of PvE. And I would say that, as far as I'm concerned, that's one of my biggest criticisms of Black Budget, is outside of the occasional, hyena that comes to attack you, or even these monsters in the center of the area, there isn't much PvP encounters to be had, and I think that's mostly what leads to a lot of the world feeling incredibly empty some of the times. I'm sure there's quite a lot of stuff that I haven't seen, and obviously this is an alpha, so many of, I would say, probably the end game content and stuff that is the most challenging is probably not here in the game as we speak, and that is probably where some of the most interesting stuff is to be found. And the PvP stuff, again, is relatively fun and solid, but it just doesn't feel like PUBG. And I think, outside of the fact that it is a fun game just from a gameplay perspective, and I actually quite enjoyed myself, and the world itself is very intriguing. I love the early 2000s aesthetic here. I think the premise is incredibly fascinating, but outside of a couple of, PvP situations that are fun, and then your occasional high-octane PvE scenario, there isn't much going on in this game. And what I think about PUBG Black Budget should do going forward, I think about what PUBG, the actual Battle Royale, did to set itself apart from its competition. When you think about the other BRs around the time of PUBG, right, you have Warzone, Fortnite, Apex Legends, the thing that PUBG did specifically that was very different to all of these from just a mechanical standpoint was that PUBG was very much focused on the one life mode, and it was very much your life has a lot of weight. Death is like very punishing in this. It's very grounded, realistic gunplay. PUBG, especially in its early days, through its choices of gameplay and all of their design elements, led to PUBG being very special even amongst the battle royale genre. And I would say what PUBG Black Budget needs to do is somehow integrate more PUBG identifiable things in here that give it that identity, because as it stands, I would say it's a decent extraction shooter. It has nothing to do with PUBG from a narrative or gameplay perspective, and it feels too similar to me to Escape from Tarkov. It isn't meaningfully different mechanically from that game to justify playing Black Budget over Tarkov. I'm sure it can find its thing, and you could argue some of that is certainly the world. I think this is probably the most fascinating world in an extraction shooter, in my personal opinion so far. All I'm saying is, though, they need to find their thing that makes them different and unique from a gameplay point of view, just as the original PUBG did as a battle royale almost 10 years ago at this point, which is crazy. But I guess that's kind of my issue with PUBG Black Budget, is I don't really understand why they feel the need to use PUBG as just like a marketing buzzword for the game that doesn't have anything to do with PUBG. If they had just called this Black Budget, I really wonder if there would be the same kind of interest or intrigue in it. With the competition in the extraction shooter market ramping up a little bit, I think PUBG Black Budget, in order to succeed, needs to find its thing. Whatever that thing is, I can't say for sure, and I can't, say it for them, obviously, but they have a really solid core foundation here. Again, the world is fascinating to me. I might play the game just for the exploration of that. But when it comes to the gameplay, unless it can meaningfully differentiate itself from Escape from Tarkov, and somehow, I don't know, maybe its gunplay starts to feel a little bit more like PUBG's guns, because otherwise I just don't really see it as productive to name it PUBG Black Budget when it resembles literally nothing to do anything with the Battle Royale portion of, this studio or whatever conglomerate KRAFTON is now. I don't know. PUBG Black Budget, I did have a fun time with it, and it has potential. It has a long ways to go before I feel like it's fully ready to compete in the market, but I didn't hate what I played at all. Obviously, it's still an alpha build, and it has a long way to go before it is a full, product that's ready to be played by everyone, but I was lucky to be able to get my hands on it to play a little bit early and give you guys my thoughts. I'm going to keep an eye on this because it's a game that I really do think has some interesting ideas that I'm, curious to see how these evolve over time. So I'm going to keep my eye out and let you guys know what I think, but I wanted to give you my first general impressions on the game, and I hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy. Peace.